Well, hello everyone, and happy hump day. Well, it's actually 10:24, so it's almost hump day, but I was doing this now because I have a full work day tomorrow. So, I wanted to make my podcast tonight, and it's actually kind of a very eventful night for me because behind all this is a ring light, and I have a little remote control for said camera. It's amazing because we're taking this seriously. So that's not why we're here today. Why we're here today is because we are going to have a different type of podcast today. So today is the gay history that you never learned in school, but you really should know. So the short version of the story is, and I apologize for the ring lights reflecting off my glasses, but I gotta be able to see because I got notes over here that I'm actually reviewing as I'm talking to you guys. I was chatting with some friends, and where this all started from was, we talked about Pride being the very first podcast, and we talked about, essentially what history was and where it started and all the pieces. And I was talking to a few friends of mine, and we were talking about Pride, and every one of them said the same thing. And I'll throw it out there for you guys, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because we're not live and nobody's in my feed right now. But think about it for like 2 seconds. What is the very first major event that you associate with the queer community uprising and what started Pride? First thing that comes into your brain. Probably the same thing that came into my friend's brain when we were talking. Stonewall, right? 1969. So I'm here to teach you a little bit of a different lesson. It actually wasn't. Stonewall in 1969 was the second major riot. There was another one before that. And that's what we're talking about today. And I'm calling today's podcast the most important cup of coffee in history. That will make sense in a very short few moments. So, picture it. San Francisco, 1960s, like back in the day in the epicenter of the gay community. So, when we kind of talk about some of these things, we're going to go all the way back and talk about that time period. Now remember, we're talking about San Francisco. So, again, the average person thinks Stonewall is the first major uprising. The really first major uprising was the Gene Compton's Cafeteria Riot of 1966, August of 1966 to be specific. So history kind of portrays that we're basically just like sitting around and waiting until Stonewall and just, biding our time and twiddling our thumbs, waiting for a riot. No, we've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. So we're gonna travel back to 60s groovy area San Francisco. We're gonna talk a little bit about a story about a group of exhausted drag queens, trans women's, and queer hustlers, and how they actually took a corrupt city and police force, made a stance, took up space, and made their presence known and started fighting for our rights as a community. Some of which we have to be very thankful for as a community today because of what happened on this specific day. So we're gonna set the scene, and I'm scrolling through my notes as I talk to you because I have a lot of things I wanna say. Plus I also have a timer on, so if you hear a ding, that means I've hit about 11 minutes and I gotta shut the hell up and get off. So, in the 60s, if you were gender non-conforming, if you were a drag queen, if you were just walking down the street in clothing that was not specific to the gender that you were assigned on your government-issued ID, in San Francisco, that was considered illegal and you could be put into jail. You heard me right. In San Francisco, that was considered illegal and you could be put into jail just because you violated what the gender bio details were on your ID card. So because of this, most of the queer community was banned from a lot of mainstream areas, different businesses, different sanctuaries. We didn't really have a place that we could go, but there was one, and it was Compton's Cafeteria. Now, I lived in San Francisco. I lived in the Bay Area for, oh my gosh, almost 20 years, and I walked past this place hundreds and hundreds of times on my way to and from work, out and about with friends. You would never know. It's long since gone, and we'll talk about that at the very end of the podcast. But back in '66, this is where people went after their shows. This is where they went after they were hanging out. They would go there after midnight and just catch up after a show, swap makeup tips, just chew the fat, and just hang out over a really nasty, cheap cup of coffee without being stared at by the rest of the non-queer or hetero community. Because back then it was a very normal thing to feel focused on and the center of attention, and not in a good way. So, you'd think it'd be a safe place. It actually wasn't. The owner of Compton's Cafeteria, Gene Compton, did not like the queer community. He literally put up with us. And he put up with us because we paid bills. There were so many of us that went after hours. And you guys might have watched the series Tales of the City. It's on Netflix, Prime, Amazon, Hulu. I'm not sure which one it's on, but there's a few. Really, really amazing. But in the second Tales of the City, in the sequel, not the first, but the second, they actually talk specifically about a sub-character that used to go to the Compton Cafeteria and a relationship she had with a corrupt cop who actually was in the closet. It's a whole thing. Very, very good. So I highly recommend it if you haven't watched it. But they focus on it there. But everybody seems to not remember that that was one of the first uprisings. So really, with Gene Compton being the owner there, not really liking the community, he would consistently and aggressively call the police. He would call the authorities on our community as we were sitting there claiming that we were staying there too long, we were causing trouble, which we never did. I mean, not until this one fateful night. And basically just, we were there taking up space and he didn't like it. So the police would roll up, they'd bully the patrons, they would, get thrown into paddy wagons, they'd get fined, they'd lose money, they'd have, their stuff thrown on the floor from police aggression or bullying. Not that all police officers are bad, because that's not what I'm saying. But back then it was a very normal thing in our community. So basically our community was tired, we were broke, and we were heavily caffeinated, and we had nowhere to go. Not really a good recipe for a bunch of people in the queer community. So, one fateful night in August, a San Francisco police officer came to Compton's Cafeteria and wine break and started harassing the patrons, and he literally grabbed one queer woman, actually she was trans, grabbed her by the arm and told her she was under arrest for loitering, and all she was doing was sitting there having a cup of coffee. She'd been there for a little while, but she was actively drinking a cup of coffee with her friends. So he expected her to go quietly, because until that point, that's what we all did. We went quietly. Well, that's what we usually did. Not that night. This amazingly fabulous, unbelievably strong woman looked at the officer, she looked down at her hands, and then she did what any self-respecting, glamorous queen would do in that situation. She picked up that cheap-ass cup of Maxwell House nasty coffee, piping hot, and threw it in his face. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was how it started. The cup of coffee that changed our world. Now, glasses started shattering, the riot started out. Coffee was the spark, but the entire diner just erupted, okay? Everybody in that the whole facility started flipping tables. They were throwing, glass sugar shakers like glitter bombs through the air. Like plates of apple pie were being launched as projectile missiles against people. They would go outside and, when they were pushed out from the actual cafeteria and had to go into the street, because eventually they did wind up going into the street because of all the police involvement, it started the riot in the street. There were police cars that had entire windows shattered from high heels and purses. There was a street traffic sign kiosk that was lit up in flames. They literally raised the roof on the entire process. So now, you would think that it's done and it's over and the queer community is not going to go back. Incorrect. And that's my tone, but I'm going to keep going because I have more things to say. They went back and they picketed and they stayed in the front, and they definitely made their presence known and made sure that they were out, about, proud, and maintained their dignity. But they stood up for themselves in a time when the rest of the world viewed them as disposable. Pioneers, truly pioneers. So history books, they love a nice, neat little pattern with paperwork that goes along with it and a bunch of legalese where narrative trails happen in like an orderly and systemic fashion. That's not the reality of it. Progress is messy. And this was a time of progress. And sometimes progress looks like a flipped over dinner table, some shattered glassware, and a very startled police officer covered in piping hot coffee. So, when you look at this, when you think about where everything started, remember those amazing queens, trans, queer brothers and sisters back in the day in 1966, in the month of August, fought for our right to take up space. The most interesting part about all of this, we're talking about San Francisco. And we're talking about a city that's the epicenter and gay mecca of our communities. It's where people go, it's where people move, it's where we want to vacation. It's where we go through all the processes and not feel marginalized. We don't feel singled out, we don't feel put off to the side. Since then, Compton's cafeteria is long since gone. It is no longer there. Closed in, I believe it was 1972, if I remember correctly from my research. You actually can't even recognize it anymore. And again, I walked past it hundreds of times and I didn't realize what it was until I happened to be walking by one day, and there's a very small plaque that's on the side of the building, and it's very understated. It was kind of dirty. It was covered in cobwebs. Pretty much just almost an afterthought in a certain way. And it was stating, the same way there's one in Stonewall, in New York. It was stating what happened on that day in August of 1966. And, our pioneers in the queer community that came before us to pave the way for the lives that we lead now. Us having makeup and hair, having our nails done, going out and walking down the street and holding hands or sharing a public kiss. These are the pioneers that paved the way for us to actually live a different version of life. One of the things, and I just wanted to point this out, because of the Compton's cafeteria riot, and I almost missed this in my notes, the city of San Francisco shifted. That's when the tables started to turn and it became more of a gay-friendly area. They established the Central City Anti-Poverty Program, and it created the first network of social, psychological, and medical support for the trans community. It was the very first one of its kind. And it's all because one really pissed off woman threw a cup of coffee at a police officer because she was tired of being treated less than. When you think about the history, when you think about our brothers and sisters that came before us, remember that Stonewall isn't the first. The true, documented, we're going to say that, first was Gene Compton's cafeteria riot in August of 1966. But that doesn't mean that's the only time. These situations, these stories, they were taking place for decades. And they've been taking place for many, many years. Maybe quietly, maybe loudly, maybe in faraway areas. But the queer community has been fighting for its right to be seen and not feel less than for a very long period of time. So when we think about the history, when we think about things that we did not learn in school, because you might have had Stonewall mentioned when you were in school, remember that that's not the first and only. There were others before that. And go to a party and somebody may mention it, you can throw out Compton's cafeteria. At this point now, it is just a series of, it's actually a halfway house. It's a segue for people who were formerly incarcerated to segue back into society, and it's a series of apartment buildings. And other than that small plaque that's on the side of the wall, there is a very, can't be more than 20 feet wide by probably about 3.5, maybe 4 feet high, and it sits probably about 8 feet up. It's very high up on the side of the building, and it's an old tattered mural. And it was done by a local artist, and it depicts some of the events that happened on that night in August of '66. And it's one of those things that make you think, the sign being a little dirty and not as prevalent and focused on the mural being a little bit older, a little bit tattered. We're still fighting for our rights, guys. We're still fighting to be seen. We're still fighting to not feel less than. And you know what? If you get to San Francisco and you can petition to touch up that mural and you're an artist, go for it. If you can get there and you want to bring some wet wipes and a series of dust cloths to dust off that little sign, go for it. I will tell you, I did. I brought some wet wipes and a little dry cloth, and I touched it up a couple times when I was walking out and about, just because, you know what? Ooh, wow, I didn't think I was gonna get emotional on this one. I'm proud of my brothers and sisters that came before me. And if it, whew, okay, wine break, hold please. Wow, didn't want to get verklempt, but I am, obviously. I am proud of my brothers and sisters that came before me. And if it wasn't for them, I would not be able to live the life that I have today. So to all those angels up in heaven that were there that night, thank you. To each and every one of you that are out there, I appreciate you all for tuning in. If you stayed the whole time, we're at about 14 minutes, so I went a little bit over my 10-minute limit, but I thought this was somewhat interesting for you guys. And if you only tuned in for a short period, leave me comments, let me know what you thought. And as always, I'm always interested to hear what you think. Whether it's Gay History 101 that you weren't taught in school, characters in our community that you might want to know a little bit more about, Marsha P., Harvey Milk, all the guys, all the gals, let me know. Give me a shout out. Let me know what your wants, needs, and desires are, what may have resonated with you, and what didn't, and what I can do better next time. And as always, the whole reason why we do this is to bridge one world and another, because love is love. And thank you all. I love each and every one of you. Appreciate you guys. Have an amazing night. Good night.